The most dangerous breath you will ever take is not your first. It is your last. And what I am about to tell you has been quietly buried because it exposes how fragile the boundary between life and death truly is. You were taught that death is a moment, a clean switch that turns off. But that is a comforting lie. Ancient physicians, monks, and battlefield surgeons all warned that the final breath is a forbidden threshold, a violent neurological event that modern medicine still struggles to explain, and I am telling you this because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You are closer to this boundary than you think, not because you are dying now, but because every breath you take is rehearsing the last one. I speak to you directly because this knowledge is not abstract, it is personal, and it is urgent. Clinical death is not silence. It is chaos. It is the moment your breathing system realizes control is slipping and launches a desperate automatic response that you do not consciously command. Your body does not ask for permission. Your brainstem does not wait for comfort. It acts. And this is where fear lives, because most people reach this moment completely unprepared, unaware of what their own nervous system will do when oxygen drops and carbon dioxide rises like an internal alarm. You think you control your breath, but at the edge of death, breathing controls you. I have studied the lab data and the old texts, and they agree on one thing. The last breath is not peaceful. It is powerful. It is the body's final message. If you do not understand it, you are blind to one of the most important biological truths of your existence. Stay with me, because what happens next will change how you breathe for the rest of your life. You have been led to believe that death arrives gently, like falling asleep. But clinical death is a hostile takeover of your body, and breathing is the first system to revolt. This is the stake you must understand right now. The line between being alive and being declared clinically dead is drawn by breath, not by the heart, not by consciousness, but by the collapse of rhythmic ventilation. When breathing fails, everything else follows, and this is why ignorance here is dangerous. You live every day assuming you have time, assuming your body will warn you politely, but at the threshold of clinical death, there is no courtesy, only automatic survival code firing at maximum intensity. Most people never realize how dependent they are on unconscious breathing control until it is stripped away. The moment oxygen delivery drops below a critical level, the brainstem seizes authority. You do not decide to inhale. You are forced. Carbon dioxide floods the blood, acidity rises, and the nervous system interprets this not as discomfort, but as an existential threat. Panic is not psychological here. It is chemical. This is why so many people who approach clinical death report terror before anything else. They were not weak. They were untrained. Here is the uncomfortable truth. You are practicing this moment right now without knowing it. Every shallow breath, every anxious sigh, every suppressed inhale conditions your nervous system, either for resilience or for collapse. Ancient traditions understood this and treated breathing as preparation for death long before modern hospitals existed. Today, we pretend this knowledge is unnecessary, and the result is a population physiologically unprepared for the most extreme moment the body can experience. You are not being told this to scare you. You are being told this because once you understand the stakes, you will never breathe casually again. Now we cross into the mechanism, the part they rarely explain because it strips away the illusion of control. When clinical death begins, the command center of breathing shifts entirely to the brainstem, specifically the medulla and pons. Structures older than thought, older than language, older than fear. This is not the mind you identify with. This is the ancient machinery that keeps mammals alive. As oxygen levels fall, specialized chemoreceptors in your carotid arteries and brainstem detect the rise of carbon dioxide like smoke filling a sealed room. Carbon dioxide is the real trigger, not oxygen, and this detail changes everything. Your body does not suffocate quietly. It panics chemically. The vagus nerve becomes the main highway of this emergency signal. It floods the system with contradictory commands, slowing the heart while simultaneously forcing violent breathing attempts. Imagine a city losing power while every alarm activates at once. Neurons fire in erratic bursts. Inhibitory signals fail. Excitatory signals dominate. This is why breathing becomes irregular, explosive, and uncontrollable. The diaphragm contracts with primal force, not elegance, not rhythm, but urgency. Ancient texts describe this as the animal soul seizing control. And neuroscience now confirms the metaphor with electrodes and blood gas measurements. At this stage, consciousness begins to fracture. Cortical control weakens as the brain redirects energy to survival circuits. Time perception distorts. Sound narrows. Vision tunnels. This is not spiritual yet. This is metabolic triage. And here is the suppressed truth. The intensity of this experience is shaped by how your nervous system has been conditioned over a lifetime of breathing habits. A trained system responds with delay and efficiency. An untrained one collapses into chaos faster. This is the mechanism. Breath is not just air. It is the switch that decides how violently the body resists the end. As the system destabilizes, something extraordinary and terrifying happens inside the brain. And this is where science quietly meets the language of myth. EEG recordings from cardiac arrest and near clinical death events reveal sudden surges of theta and gamma waves, patterns usually associated with deep meditation, dreaming, and heightened perception. But here they appear in a raw, uncontrolled spike. This is not enlightenment. This is the brain dumping everything it has left. Neurons that normally communicate politely begin firing in synchrony, like a crowd shouting at once, and the mind experiences this as overwhelming intensity. People later call it visions, tunnels, lights. But what you are witnessing is a cortex losing its filters. At the same time, the autonomic nervous system splits against itself. The sympathetic branch screams for action, while the parasympathetic branch, driven by the vagus nerve, pulls toward shutdown. Heart rate may slow even as breathing becomes violent. Blood pressure collapses while neural activity flares. This contradiction is why the last breath looks so strange from the outside and feels so profound on the inside. Some researchers suspect the release of endogenous compounds, including massive endorphins and possibly DMT-like molecules, not as mystical gifts, but as emergency neurochemical fire suppressors. An attempt to reduce pain and maintain coherence as oxygen vanishes. Ancient death rites describe this moment as the opening of the final gate, warning that untrained minds would be overwhelmed by fear and hallucination. Modern labs describe it as cortical disinhibition under hypoxic stress. Different languages, same event. And here is the critical connection. Breathing patterns directly influence how abruptly this cascade unfolds. Faster loss of control equals harsher neural shock. Slower, conditioned responses soften the transition. This is not belief. This is physiology. The last breath is not just air leaving the lungs. It is a neurological storm, and how violently it strikes depends on how you have trained your breath long before this moment arrives. What most people never see, and what even many clinicians misunderstand, is that the last breath is not a gentle exhale. It is a reflexive seizure of the respiratory system known as agonal respiration. This is where the body reveals its final programming. The diaphragm does not relax. It spasms. The intercostal muscles fire in uncoordinated bursts. Air is dragged in and expelled in harsh, gasping patterns that look disturbing because they are disturbing. This is not suffering in the emotional sense. This is the nervous system executing a last resort algorithm written millions of years ago. It is brutal because it is designed to be. Carbon dioxide levels at this stage are extreme. Blood pH drops. Acid floods the system. And this acidity directly stimulates the respiratory centers, forcing each gasp like a hammer strike. You cannot calm this with thought. You cannot reason with it. Conscious control has already been stripped away. This is why witnesses often describe the last breaths as violent, irregular, even frightening. The body is not giving up. It is fighting with everything left. Ancient observers believe the soul was struggling to leave the body. Modern physiology says the same thing in a colder language. The brainstem is attempting to restore gas exchange at all costs. Here is the detail that changes everything. The strength, duration, and chaos of agonal breathing vary dramatically between individuals, and the difference is not moral or genetic alone. It is neurological conditioning. Systems exposed to chronic shallow breathing, anxiety-driven hyperventilation, or suppressed respiration reach this phase faster and with more turbulence. Systems trained through controlled breath exposure show delayed onset and more organized patterns. This is why warriors, monks, and free divers have historically shown unusual calm near death. Not because they were fearless, but because their breathing reflexes had been trained under stress. The last breath is not random. It is the final expression of how you have breathed your entire life. Now listen carefully, because this is where fear turns into leverage. I am not giving you a technique to flirt with death. That would be reckless and dangerous, and anyone who suggests otherwise is lying to you. What I am giving you is a protocol of nervous system training, extracted from intensive care data, hypoxia research, and ancient initiation practices that understood the breath as a survival weapon. The goal is simple, but profound: to condition your autonomic system so it does not panic when carbon dioxide rises and oxygen falls. Panic is what accelerates collapse. Control is what buys time. In laboratory settings, controlled breathing has been shown to directly influence vagal tone, chemoreceptor sensitivity, and tolerance to hypercapnia. In plain language, this means you can train your body to endure the very chemical signals that trigger terror at the edge of clinical death. Slow nasal breathing, extended exhalation, and brief, controlled breath. Holds recalibrate the brainstem's alarm thresholds. Each repetition teaches the nervous system that rising CO2 is not an immediate death sentence. Over time, this reduces reflexive gasping and chaotic respiratory firing. Ancient traditions encoded this knowledge in ritual and myth. Modern science measures it in heart rate variability, blood gases, and EEG stability. This is why ICU patients with prior breath training often show delayed agonal patterns and more stable autonomic responses. This is why free divers remain lucid under conditions that would crush an untrained system. The protocol is not mystical. It is mechanical. You are teaching your most primitive neural circuits to remain functional under stress. And here is the uncomfortable realization. Whether you train this or not, the last breath will come. The only question is whether your nervous system meets it like a panicked animal or a conditioned organism. Breath training does not cheat death. It changes how violently your body resists it. Transformation does not arrive as a miracle. It arrives as measurable change. And this is where most people lose patience, and therefore lose power. Within the first days of disciplined breath training, the nervous system begins to recalibrate its baseline. Resting respiratory rate drops. Carbon dioxide tolerance increases. You may notice discomfort during breath holds softening instead of spiking into panic. That is not willpower. That is chemoreceptor adaptation. The alarm is being reset. Within 1 to 2 weeks, heart rate variability increases, a direct signal that vagal control is strengthening and the autonomic system is learning flexibility instead of rigidity. This is the same flexibility that determines how violently the body reacts at the edge of clinical death. By the 3rd and 4th week, the change becomes psychological, but the cause is still biological. Fear responses linked to breath restriction weaken. The mind stops interpreting air hunger as immediate catastrophe. This is critical. Near death, fear amplifies chaos. Remove the amplification, and the system slows down. Studies on hypoxia-trained individuals consistently show delayed onset of panic, more organized breathing reflexes, and preserved cognitive clarity under stress. You are not becoming fearless. You are becoming accurate. Your body is learning the difference between discomfort and extinction. Over months, the transformation becomes structural. The diaphragm becomes stronger and more elastic. Intercostal coordination improves. Neural pathways linking the brainstem to higher cortical regulation stabilize. This means that even when conscious control fades, the reflexes that remain are calmer, more efficient, less explosive. This is the hidden timeline no one talks about. Breath training reshapes how you meet stress, how you meet fear, and ultimately, how you meet the final threshold. You are not training for death. You are training for the moment when your body is most likely to betray you. And that training changes the ending. This is where the conversation becomes uncomfortable, because it exposes why this knowledge is avoided, softened, or dismissed. If people truly understood that the last breath is not a peaceful fade, but a neurological confrontation, they would be forced to change how they live, how they breathe, and how they face fear. Modern culture prefers sedation, distraction, and denial. Ancient cultures preferred preparation. That difference is not philosophical, it is physiological. A society that never trains its breath produces nervous systems that collapse faster under extreme stress. That is not conspiracy, that is consequence. Near-death experiences, out-of-body sensations, and reports of clarity or terror are not proof of fantasy or proof of the afterlife. They are proof that the human brain enters an altered state when oxygen, carbon dioxide, and neural inhibition cross specific thresholds. What you feel in that moment depends on how violently those thresholds are crossed. A system conditioned only for comfort experiences shock. A system conditioned for controlled stress experiences coherence. This is why monks, ascetics, and disciplined warriors across cultures reported similar inner landscapes near death, while untrained individuals reported confusion and panic. Different preparation, different outcome. And here is the ethical weight of it. Teaching breath awareness is not about obsession with death. It is about reclaiming responsibility for the most fundamental biological process you possess. When you understand the last breath, you stop wasting the current one. You stop breathing as if it were infinite. You stop living as if fear were unavoidable. This is why the topic feels forbidden. It removes excuses. It removes helplessness. It replaces them with discipline. Once you see breathing as preparation for the ultimate boundary, Avoidance becomes impossible. Awareness becomes mandatory. Now the challenge is unavoidable, and I am speaking to you directly because this is where knowledge either hardens into action or dissolves into nothing. You will take your last breath one day. That is not a threat. That is biology. The question is not when, but how prepared your nervous system will be when the moment arrives. Every unconscious breath you take from now on is either training you for panic or training you for control. There is no neutral ground. Breathing casually is a luxury you no longer have once you understand this. I challenge you to stop treating breath as background noise. Slow it down. Lengthen the exhale. Feel the discomfort of air hunger without running from it. Teach your body that rising carbon dioxide is a signal, not a catastrophe. This is not about becoming obsessed with death. It is about becoming impossible to destabilize by fear. When your breath is trained, stress loses its weapon. Panic loses its leverage. And when the final threshold comes, whether suddenly or slowly, your body will not meet it as a stranger. You were never meant to be ignorant of your own biology. The last breath is not a mystery reserved for hospitals and textbooks. It is the final exam of a system you are rehearsing right now. Train deliberately, breathe consciously, prepare quietly, because the most dangerous breath of your life is not waiting in the future. It is being shaped by the one you're taking at this very moment.